I am absolutely sick to death of having to make complaints about things related to Edge of Fate, and to be honest, I, at the minute, kind of feel like a giant crying baby, with the sense that there is always something to complain about in the Destiny community. And of course that's true, it's been true for a long time, but with regards to Edge of Fate, while there is toxicity, there are folks in this community who are very burned out and exhausted by the way that Bungie handle updates to the game. I'm not writing off any of those concerns as not being true or real, but equally, there are loads of folks who are excited for Edge of Fate and want to continue playing Destiny 2, but also have major concerns about what Bungie are implementing with regards to systems. That includes some folks who are pretty big supporters of the changes Bungie are making in Edge of Fate, like Mactix. And he said over the past few days, Edge of Fate is looking like a boatload of incredible foundational long-term game changes, like gear tiering, set bonuses, the stat rework, but with one change, the new gear bonuses that I worry will stifle build crafting and build diversity and overshadow all of the good stuff. And I guess you can agree or disagree with the majority of changes that we're getting in the game next month, but the new gear seasonal artifact bonus is something that's being brought up a lot right now. For the sake of clarity, new gear in Edge of Fate will be identified by the teal color icon in the top left corner, and it basically refers to gear that is introduced into the game every 6 months. So if you have a new weapon versus one of your old weapons, the new ones will get a bonus from the artifact, and if those are fully upgraded weapons, it essentially equates to a 10% damage bonus. And there'll be the equivalent for armor as well. Each piece of new armor equipped grants damage resist, all the way up to 15% damage resistance if you had 5 tier 5 pieces of armor. And of course, the problem with this is that if you earn some absolute god roll weapons or armor in Edge of Fate, after 6 months, they are basically going to lose a whole bunch of bonuses that they've accrued via the artifact, right? So those weapons will become weaker in favor of new gear that is introduced in the next expansion, and the same will apply to armor, essentially. Bungie actually expanded this beyond where we thought it would go into exotic weapons and armor, so they'll be introducing a featured tab of gear that also will get these bonuses, and that will rotate on a 6-monthly basis as well. So Dead Man's Tale, Barrow Dyad, New Land Beyond, Choir of One, Graviton Lance. They're just a few examples of weapons that will get that 10% damage bonus. And armor that will factor into that includes Felwinter's Helm, Balador's Wrathweavers, and Starfire Protocol, for instance. They only actually showed Warlock exotics, but there'll be a big pool of exotic gear that also gets these bonuses. Now, in isolation, when Edge of Fate drops, this is going to make all of the new gear, or the featured rewards, even more enticing, but obviously, there's that big problem, again, that you could have a really perfect build, and across your weapons and armor, basically, all of it will automatically get weaker at the end of the season. Now, I've mentioned this before, one of the big positives for Bungie is that they can essentially kill this idea before it becomes a big problem, right? If they change what that bonus is going to do as we head into Renegades, then obviously that gear will still lose the bonuses, which is far from ideal. I think that's going to be a really hard problem to actually solve at this point because Edge of Fate is about to ship. But the one benefit if Bungie go in a different direction is that a new weapon in Renegades won't automatically be better than something that you've worked really hard to acquire in Edge of Fate. And I think these seasonal bonuses should simply apply to characters, which essentially would make them like artifact perks that we have right now, but I strongly feel that Bungie should decouple these bonuses from gear specifically and that time-limited component where gear is considered to be new and then considered to essentially be old. As in this current form, it's just going to make that stuff more redundant. And that's why there's a lot of complaints about Bungie trying to target engagement and get players to play the game for as long as possible, as opposed to actually worrying about all of these bonuses being fun. And whether you like the gear tier system, the new stat system, whatever it is, this is an additional component that Bungie ultimately can fix before it really brings a sour taste, because the problem will actually land when we get to December and everything from Edge of Fate loses that bonus. Looking at comments from folks in the community, Bungie of course described it as a cherry on top, but Mr. BLT said, I think it'll be an almost mandatory chase, and with the featured exotic list, it's almost like they're dictating the meta even more outside of artifact perks. And I would totally agree with that sentiment. Keku said new gear systems can make or break build diversity. Remember spending hours tweaking RPG setups only for one meta to dominate. Plus, Flibber on Reddit said, from what I've gathered, new weapons will get a 10% damage bonus, and while new armor will get a 15% damage resist bonus. On top of that, there'll be a curated pool of featured exotic weapons and armor that will get those bonuses. And they argue it's simply bad for the game. The idea that this feature is to encourage players to keep grinding for new stuff and to keep the carrot on the stick comes with the terrible side effect that this is massively reducing the viable gear and weapons that can be used. And before anyone says, but you can still use old gear, they highlight it's a looter shooter, you grind for the best possible gear, no one, not even casual players, will give up on a 15% damage reduction and 10% weapon damage increase, as those are massive buffs. And as I've mentioned before, that will especially affect higher end content, right? If you're in a seasonal level of activity, a basic thing, or in a patrol, 10% damage on your weapons is kind of inconsequential, really. It's not a big deal, but if you're running the new dungeon or the new raid, 10% of your total boss damage obviously is far more considerable. The same if you're a solo player, right, tackling mid to end game content. What seems like a small bonus in a very casual setting is of course a much bigger bonus in a more hardcore setting, right? And so in that respect, I think it's a fair argument. Like I said at the start of the video, I hate to feel like I'm complaining continuously, and I certainly have concerns about these systems, but when we look across the community, it's a massive point of feedback right now, so it's very, very difficult to ignore, right? So I think the new gear component is just something that Bungie should try and just remove or completely rework as soon as is actually possible, right? Even if they don't manage to do it within the Edge of Fate window, that first few months that it drops, I certainly hope that they can rethink this in a significant way before we get to Renegades, when it will ultimately affect gear that we've earned in Edge of Fate. So that's my feedback on it. Bungie, just honestly, I think you need to kill it. If you don't kill it in the next 2 or 3 months, the community are going to complain so much that you will do it in 6 months' time anyway. And this is the fine balance, including with things like the tier system for gear, the general chase and rewardingness of the game. There are enough complicated changes happening with Armor 3.0 and the gear tiering system to where I think this is an extra layer of consideration for players that just is not necessary, and also, again, has that potential to make it feel like the time investment is just not being rewarded or considered later down the line. And Bungie are focusing on this sort of engagement type mechanic where it's like you have to get new gear, otherwise it's going to be weaker. And they're doing that in favor of players feeling like their investment is recognized and appreciated moving forward, which just cannot be a good idea. So that's my feedback on it. My other feedback in general is that Bungie has spent a lot of time talking about system changes. I think it's really time to try and sell Edge of Fate a bit more. What is the new content looking like? Will Kepler be match-made as a destination? Will it have other activities, like world activities? The equivalent of Wellspring on 7th and Throneworld, for instance. The problem here is that if Bungie don't start to talk about Edge of Fate in a bit more depth, we can only assume that there is not a lot more that they see as good marketing material to actually talk about, right? Which would be a significant shame. The last thing I would like to say here, though, to the Bungie developers, the folks who have been making Edge of Fate and the system changes that we've got, many of them are veterans of Destiny development, right? They've worked on a bunch of the best releases we've ever had for the game, and they are incredibly passionate and hardworking. I absolutely do not blame Bungie devs in general for these kinds of issues. Of course, there are direction problems with some of the concepts, but Bungie are working within the confines of limited resources, less than what we've had in the past. And I'm sure that while there are flaws in the systems they're putting up here, there must have been a significant amount of crunch to actually get the game to where it's going to be when Edge of Fate drops. And there's so much harsh feedback at the minute. I think we should just keep in mind that there are loads of really passionate people who work really hard on Destiny. And a lot of the shortfalls here come on the basis of the confines that they're working in, right? The amount of resources they have, the amount of time they have to actually produce these pieces of content. It's only gotten harder for those developers to actually do their job properly, as best we can tell based on everything we've heard about Bungie in recent years. So from my perspective, absolutely nothing personal here. Thanks to all the developers who have been really passionate and worked hard to make Destiny a great game for all these years. I just think there are some very significant issues that if Bungie don't get on top of, talk about, address them, and even market some of what's coming in Edge of Fate, then they're just essentially doing themselves no favors, right? Especially at a time where they could use a few favors. So that's my thoughts. Give me yours down below. You can absolutely count on me to continue to cover Destiny content. When Edge of Fate drops, I'll be fully focused on all the new stuff. How do we get some juicy gear? Where are the quests and secrets and all of that kind of stuff? I'm just going to go into that launch mode. And I'm hoping there'll be enough positives to pluck there to hopefully have us avoid needing to make this kind of video repeatedly, but we will just have to see. For the moment, guys, thank you for tuning in, and whatever you get up to, I hope you have an awesome day.